Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to take that stack of sources you've shared with us and really just pull out the critical nuggets. We give you the shortcut to being genuinely well informed. Today, we're plunging into the current state of the USA-Taliban relationship, and it's not an easy one to define.
No, it's full of contradictions, confusing security issues, and huge humanitarian consequences.
Exactly. And what's remarkable is that your material points to three recent events. On the surface, they seem totally separate.
Right, completely disconnected.
But when you start to stitch them together, you see this singular, really high-stakes geopolitical game being played. So for this deep dive, we're going to unpack those three threads for you. First, a sudden, pretty provocative demand by the U.S. to reclaim a key military base, one they just walked away from a few years ago. Then we'll shift home to a shocking security incident right near the White House and the sweeping policy response that came right after. And finally, we'll have to confront the devastating human cost that's been left in the wake of a failing peace deal.
And if we connect these dots, you can see this isn't just routine foreign policy. We're watching a high-stakes triangulation of American priorities. You've got, on one hand, the need to deal with immediate domestic security threats. Then there's the big regional power plays, mainly aimed at countering China.
Right.
And then you have this unavoidable moral weight of the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Trying to manage all three at once, it seems almost impossible.
Okay, let's start with that big, bold move then.
Yep.
The demand to reclaim Bagram Air Base. For anyone who remembers 2021, the U.S. leaving Bagram, I mean, that was the symbolic moment, the end of the war.
It was the final chapter.
And now the material says President Trump is demanding it back. That's a massive reversal. So why? Why the aggressive focus on Bagram now?
The motive is, it's pure strategy. It's all about geography.
Yeah.
When the U.S. abandoned Bagram, it was seen as giving up this critical observation deck, geopolitically speaking.
An observation deck, I like that.
Yeah, because its value isn't just about putting troops on the ground. It's about intelligence. Bagram is located incredibly close to some very sensitive areas. We're talking key regions in China.
Yeah.
Near their nuclear sites, and right up against the Xinjiang region.
So it's an intelligence gold mine.
It's a gold mine for intelligence gathering, for signal intelligence SIGINT, and just for maintaining surveillance over a huge critical swath of Central and South Asia. For any administration that wants to aggressively counter China's expansion, Bagram offers this unique, fixed platform that's, well, it's basically impossible to replicate anywhere else.
Okay, so the location is the core of the strategy.
Yeah.
But the Taliban are the ones running the base now. How did they react to this aggressive demand?
They refused, flatly.
Just a hard no?
A hard no. And that refusal, according to the reports, led to a specific escalation. Trump apparently issued a threat.
A threat.
Yeah, that if the base wasn't returned, bad things will happen, which, as you can imagine, is not exactly standard diplomatic language.
Right. It feels less like a negotiation and more like leverage. Is Bagram the only goal here, or is this maybe a way to secure other, more short-term wins?
That's the pragmatic read on it, I think. Bagram is the long-term prize, but this aggressive demand could just be a tool. It could be leveraged to secure things that are, maybe easier to get, like hostage swaps for U.S. citizens still detained there.
Or the weapons?
Or the weapons.
Yeah.
The massive stockpiles of sophisticated military gear that were left behind in the withdrawal. Everything from aircraft to biometric devices. Just getting that stuff back, or at least making sure the Taliban can't use it, would be a major win.
And you can't forget the regional picture here. You said this is a power play. How are the neighbors looking at the idea of the U.S. coming back?
That is a massive constraint on this whole Bagram gambit. It's not just the Taliban saying no.
Okay.
Both India and Russia have been very explicit. They oppose any foreign bases in the area. They see a renewed U.S. military footprint as destabilizing for them.
So even if the U.S. could force a deal?
Even then, the diplomatic cost and the tension with other major players would be huge. This whole thing just shows how tangled that 2021 withdrawal still is.
And it's so critical to remember that while this geopolitical chess game is happening overseas, the domestic consequences of that withdrawal are hitting home hard, culminating in this really dramatic security incident in D.C. that just instantly flipped immigration policy on its head.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's. The D.C. shooting, because the details are not just dramatic, they're deeply contradictory. It paints a really confusing picture. We know an Afghan evacuee, Ramanullah Lakanwal, shot at a National Guard member near the White House, but his background, That's where it gets really interesting.
This is where the complexities just multiply.
Yeah.
Lochinwall was an evacuee. He arrived through Operation Allies Welcome after Kabul fell.
Right.
The reporting also suggests he had direct links to the CIA.
To the CIA.
But the timeline of his legal status, that's where the political narrative gets very tricky. He was a Biden-era evacuee, but he actually received asylum during the Trump administration.
Wait a second. So if the asylum was granted under the previous administration, doesn't that undermine the immediate policy halt? It makes it look purely political.
Precisely. The incident is a security failure, no question. But pinning down the responsibility is difficult given his history. But the political response was immediate, and it was comprehensive.
What
A
happened?
quick halt to all Afghan immigration.
Yeah.
And in order to re-vet all 77,000 Afghans who were already in the U.S.
Revetting 77,000 people. That is an immense task.
Yeah.
And it's all triggered by one incident, even if it was a high-profile one.
Yeah.
So what does this policy shift signal to you?
It raises the core question that you, as you listen to this, need to grapple with when you look at these sources. Is this shooting genuine evidence of a massive systemic failure in the vetting process that really requires a full stop on green cards and asylum? Or is it mainly political, an aggressive America First policy in action that ends up unjustly labeling everyone fleeing the Taliban as a potential threat?
There's a real risk here of what critics call security theater.
Actions taken to appear secure, to calm public fear, often through sweeping bans, instead of actually fixing the specific sophisticated security loopholes that might exist.
Right. Performative security versus real assessment.
That's the tension. And it's at the absolute crux of the debate in the sources.
That tension links directly to our final segment, which is, it's the catastrophic human fallout from all of this. We have to look at the failure of the 2020 Doha Agreement.
The assessment of that deal is pretty unequivocal across the board. It was a flop.
A complete flop.
Yes. The core promise the U.S. got from the Taliban was on counterterrorism.
Yeah.
A vow to stop groups like al-Qaeda from using Afghanistan as a launch pad. And yet, the intelligence now shows the Taliban is actively harboring al-Qaeda, providing safe haven, letting them rebuild. They're completely violating the agreement.
And the breakdown didn't stop there. The other major promise was about human rights, moving toward a peaceful government.
Absolutely not. They immediately started rolling back women's rights, denying education, denying work, which, by the way, has only fueled more insurgency against them. The entire trade-off U.S. withdrawal for stability and counterterror has failed. Completely. It's led to more internal conflict and a rapid spiral into a humanitarian crisis.
And the human cost of this failure is just staggering, especially when we connect it to U.S. aid and those frozen assets.
The humanitarian situation is one of the worst in the world. We're talking about 23 million Afghans, more than half the population facing severe hunger.
23 million.
They depend almost entirely on outside aid just to survive. The sources detail clinics closing, medicine being unavailable, food supplies just disappearing. These aren't abstract numbers. These are millions of lives hanging in the balance based on geopolitical decisions about funding.
And while the crisis gets bigger, the funding to deal with it is drying up. It's becoming a global headache.
That's right. UN funding is falling. Donors are getting frustrated with the Taliban, especially in women's rights. The U.S. still has immense leverage, though.
Through the frozen assets.
Exactly. The freezing of the Afghan central bank assets. That's about $7 billion.
Can you explain how that works? Saying it tightens the economic chokehold is powerful, but how does freezing that money stop food from getting to people on the ground?
It's all about liquidity and banking. That $7 billion belonged to the Afghan central bank. By freezing it, the U.S. cut off the entire banking system's access to international currency.
Ah, okay.
So without that liquidity, local banks can't process large international transactions. Aid organizations, even if they get exemptions, struggle to pay their local staff or buy goods in foreign currency. The U.S. leverage point, the asset freeze, it's punishing the regime, sure, but its primary victims are those 23 million citizens who depend on that aid.
And all of this is being complicated by new regional issues, right? The situation isn't static.
Not at all. You see volatility on the border, with ongoing fights between Pakistan and the Taliban. That creates instability, refugee flows. But at the same time, other players are making pragmatic moves. India, for instance, has decided to reopen its embassy.
So they're re-engaging.
They're re-engaging. It shows that regional powers are carving out their own influence, regardless of the U.S. stance, which just makes any unified international front much harder to maintain.
So if we look back at all three threads, the Bagram gambit, the D.C. shockwave, and this devastating humanitarian crisis, how do we synthesize it? What's the likely path forward?
The consensus in the analysis suggests the next U.S. administration, whoever it is, will likely stay pragmatic. This points towards an aggressive push for a mini-deal, not about peace or governance.
Just tactical.
Highly tactical, focused on gains like Bagram or forcing the return of assets, using that threat of bad things as the main leverage. But the overarching challenge for the U.S. doesn't go away. It's balancing two conflicting needs. One, the geopolitical need to counter China, which is what's driving the Bagram issue. And two, the real security threat from a Taliban regime that has proven it won't honor its counterterrorism promises. Walking both paths at the same time is the core tension.
So, connecting three of our deep dive points back to you, the listener, we've navigated the tension between that geopolitical necessity reclaiming Bagram and the immediate domestic security fears from the D.C. shooting. And we've seen how both are tied to the unavoidable global responsibility of the humanitarian crisis. These threads are absolutely inextricably linked. And this leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider based on all this material we've unpacked. Given the simultaneous urgent need to revet 77,000 potential security risks already in the U.S., and the stark fact that 23 million desperate Afghan citizens depend on outside aid for their survival, how does a government successfully navigate that ethical and strategic chasm? The one between prioritizing absolute domestic security and fulfilling critical global humanitarian duties? That is the complex question you must now grapple with.